All right, guys. So welcome to Competency in the EX World, or How to Comply webinars. Today with us we have Bob. Well, let me see if I can. It says I'm in control, but nothing is happening, Bob. I cannot move this slide. See if you can move to the next slide. Okay, here we go. Whoops, one too many. Here we go.
Are you controlling it or am I controlling it?
So, you know what, Bob? Let me do this. Sorry, guys, only a few moments. Give up remote control. I'll let you run it, okay? Because
okay.
So, next slide, please, Bob. So, Bob is with us. We take a moment to introduce him to those of you who don't know him yet. He's our guest and speaker for today, and Bob has over 30 years of experience in the EX world. He's a COMPX instructor as well as an instructor for the IECEx COPC scheme. And he's also an inspector and a member of the US ULSTP committee. He's worked in the EX world for many, many years with this company, IECEx. So he's more than qualified to run this webinar. And in fact, we've done several webinars together, and honestly, we never found a question you could not answer. Let's see what happens. Before we go into the webinar, let me take, well, Bob, please go to the next slide. A few moments to introduce GMI and what we are, what we do, and why we do it. So GMI International is a safety company with design, engineer, and manufacture a complete range of intrinsically safe and SEAL certified devices for all automation packages such as DCS, CSD, fire and gas, and so on, supplied in the oil and gas, petrochemical, pharmaceutical, and many other industries. We have 40 plus years of experience, and we are very proud to be 100% internally manufacturing our product in our state-of-the-art facility near Milan, Italy. We have a global presence around the globe, around the continent. So, because we make safety products, we take special care in manufacturing them. So, we use state-of-the-art technology, we use 100% product traceability and 100% testing. We have a fully automated manufacturing process. We are ROS REACH compliant. We are also certified functional safety management up to C3. So our product carry an SC3 certification, which means that not only the product, but the process and the manufacturing process and the design engineering process are also certified to be compliant up to C3 level. And we do this because we care for our environment, our people, the world we live in. A safer world is a better world for all of us. Next, okay, these are the products we manufacture. We manufacture IS barriers, safety relays, with and without line monitoring. We have isolators, also SEAL certified. We have a line of power supply, which are EX and SEAL certified. We have multiplexers, temperature multiplexers, art multiplexers, digital multiplexers. We also have a series of termination board and custom product designed to interface system vendors like Yokogawa, ABB, and so on. We have a line of surge protectors, some loop indicators, and I see functional safety training and services slide. Bob, you did not download the latest presentation.
I didn't.
So it's okay. We have a new slide there that says we also do EX services, so training and services in the EX domain. Okay, next. In fact, in there we said direct subsidiary 10, not 8. That is another change we made. So we have 10 direct presences around the globe, from Shanghai, Dubai, Moscow, and so on. We have many distributors and about 200 people, and we run many courses. Now, most of them are run online, digital courses, not any longer one-to-one, but perhaps, hopefully, next year we'll go back to that. We have thousands of installations, and these are list of our customers, from ABB to Yokogawa and EPCs, many EPCs we do project with, And we are very proud to supply our product to many OEMs, such as Cameron or NOV, Halliburton's, because we offer high reliable product. And of course, we are in the AVL, approved vendor list of many oil and gas companies. I believe this is our last slide, Bob, in this presentation. Let me see, yes. So now it's all in your hand, Bob. Before we start, let me remind you guys that there's a question and answer box there. You can use that to post questions. We will try to answer it through the webinar or at the end of the webinars. We also prepare a question and answer presentation, which we got from your question when you register. So feel free to ask any question. This is the only way you can contact us. The webinar will be registered. It is registered, and later you'll be able, we'll share you the link how you can review it. Okay, Bob, it's in your hand. Thank you.
All right. Thank you, Paulo. Well, thank you everybody for joining us. And it is early in the morning. I know many of you are probably not here in the United States, so it may be in the middle of the afternoon or in the evening. So I hope you're all doing well. And Paulo, I apologize for the slides I used in previous presentations. So no problems. So competency, it is a big buzzword that people use, that you see it in a lot of specifications. It's talked about a lot within the various international EX standards. So let's define it. What is competency? It encompasses a combination of knowledge, skills, and behavior. So it is the requirements for an individual to properly perform a specific job. So there's three legs to competency. You have to know, and you have to demonstrate that skill, and then the behavior is doing it over and over and over again, right? So again, competency doesn't mean that you have necessarily a lot of experience, right? That's the important thing to understand. There's a lot of people out there that have been doing things, but they've been doing it wrong for a long period of time. One of my colleagues that works here worked in the offshore market for about 15 years as an electrical installation technician. And he went and did a competency program after about 15 years spending all this time doing installations offshore, and realized that he had been doing a lot of things completely wrong. Even though he'd been doing it what he thought was right, and he'd had a lot of experience, he realized very quickly that he didn't know what he was actually doing. So it's important to understand competency is, again, not just experience. And understanding that competency applies to different roles and responsibilities. So just because you're competent in one area doesn't necessarily mean that you're competent in another area. Look at it as an airline pilot. You know, a pilot that knows how to fly a Cessna doesn't necessarily know how to fly an Airbus. Or even within the Airbus family, you know, you have to understand how to fly the different jets. So you have to demonstrate your capability, and then you finally must be assessed in the performance. This is where somebody sits over you and looks at you and says, yes, you know what you're doing, or no, you need more work. So competency is basically that knowledge, skills, and performance and behavior. So where did competency really come to a head, if you will, with regards to the EX world? And really, if we go back and look at the history of EX installations, it was really developed, and the first competency programs came out of the Piper Alpha explosion that happened in the North Sea in 1988. Piper Alpha, it was not an electrical issue that actually caused all the problems, but there was a lot of lockout tagout issues. There was responsibility of management. There was a lot of things that took place that caused ultimately the disaster. But this was a real wake-up call, not just for the offshore oil industry, but for the industry as a whole. And Piper Alpha did constitute about 10% of the total North Sea production of oil and gas. And it was a traumatic loss of life. 167 people were killed. So what happened after Piper Alpha? There was an investigation. It was called the Cullen Report, and it took about 2 years to publish or to come up, and it finally was published. And in that report, there was 106 recommendations, and every single one of those recommendations were implemented. And one of the key things was, in one of those recommendations, that the employer should be responsible for the competency of its employees. So this was kind of a, I guess what you could say, a vague mandate, if you will. But a lot of the owner operators and the regulators started looking at it and said, well, how can we determine the competency of employees, specifically for the electrical and instrumentation folks? So what really also came out of it, there was improvements of the permit to work system and the initiation of formal safety assessments. So this was now starting to formalize a lot of the things that people were taking for granted. We now really have to have systems in place to regulate, to mandate, or not mandate, but to basically stay on top of it. So what happened really is the Cullen report had come out, and the other owner operators in the North Sea, the folks like Shell, BP, BG, Esso, Chevron, they all got together, all the technical authorities from all the major oil and gas companies. Basically, they got together. They said, we need to do a better job. It didn't start off as, it started off as a governmental mandate, but the original programs were actually really developed by the oil and gas operators themselves. And they said, we want to have an outside entity to develop a competency program that we can put our people through to be able to make sure that these individuals know what they're doing the moment they step on an offshore oil platform. So the first program that was developed was COMPEX, and that was done, and it was introduced in 1994 at Aberdeen College. And flash or go forward to today, what we have now within Europe, we have the IECEx 153 directive, and many of you are probably familiar with IECEx. Well, the IECEx 153 directive is basically that now it puts the onus on the owner operator of the facility to make sure that the individuals that are participating in electrical and instrumentation work and all different kinds of roles, they must be competent in some way, shape, or form. And this got implemented in the UK as what it was called the DSIR regulations. So in a roundabout way, the original competency programs came from where it was really more of a client-specific requirement to all of a sudden it became more of a regulatory requirement under the UK DSIR regulations. Now, what standards are out there that really define competency? And where do we find the information, and how do we determine, and what determines what is an individual is competent or what have you? So the main installation standard that we use and that most of the competency programs are based upon is the 60079-14 standard. This is our design standard that we follow for EX designs. Now, there are other IEC standards out there. The 61892 standards deal specifically for offshore oil platforms, and there's a whole bunch of other IEC standards, obviously. But the one that we really follow with regards to competency is the 14 and the -17 standard, which is our inspection standard. And now the latest edition of 80079-34, which applies to manufacturers of EX equipment. So if I'm a manufacturer of EX equipment, this second edition that was published about 1.5 years ago now requires competency for the manufacturers. So it's showing up in a lot of these standards. It's important to understand and realize why it's important. So just because a standard gets written doesn't necessarily mean that it becomes a regulatory requirement, right? Standards are standards, and it really is up to the role of the regulators to make a determination of how they're going to apply it. And so, as I mentioned, in the UK, the organization that's really responsible for health and safety is the Health and Safety Executive in the UK. They are the guys that will come in and shut down a facility if you're doing things wrong. In the United States, we have organizations like OSHA, we have the US Coast Guard, we have BSEE, we have different regulatory agencies, and we have different regulatory agencies all throughout the world that basically, in some respects, adopt these standards and say you must comply with these standards. So Competency comes in effect, it starts at the standards, but it also comes from the clients insisting on it, and now the regulators are also getting involved. So this is actually something that just happened here in the United States. This was published in July of this year. So now this is actually the first time that in the United States, we're now starting to require competency. The United States has actually been a little bit behind the ball with regards to some of the requirements. In many other parts of the world, competency has been in place. The regulators have bought into this, but now finally the United States is starting to require this as well. So this deals specifically with LNG carriers, the ships that are using liquefied natural gas. And they're now realizing that a lot of the electrical equipment on some of these carriers are not safe. And they're making sure that if you own this ship and you want to sail in US waters, that these individuals must be competent. So therefore, now we're starting to see in the United States a requirement for competency from the regulators.
All right, Bob.
So,
we've been talking about a lot of standards. So guys, we have a question for you. See if you've been listening to Bob. Let me launch this poll and give you a few moments to answer. There's nobody going to judge you. We don't really see who's answering what, but we like to get the feeling if you understood what Bob was talking about. You know, it seems, Bob, that competency is required in every aspect of life. I mean, you want to cook some food, you gotta know how to do it. You know?
Right.
Not expecting to be competent or a mechanic. So why that should not apply to our industry, which is a very, risky industry?
It's a safety critical thing. It's generally speaking, when we hire a contractor to do something, do some work, in certain parts of the world, it could be just a guy with a screwdriver and a wrench. In other parts of the world, no, we say we must have a licensed contractor. Well, what does a licensed contractor mean? Well, it means that this individual has been trained and assessed and all this other good stuff. So you're right. Competency has always been assumed, but now because of so many industrial accidents that have taken place over the last so many years, and still to this day, we hear about accidents happening all over the world. And in many cases, it comes down to human error. It comes down to maybe the designer. It comes down to the technician. But yeah, competency is somewhat a given. It's almost an afterthought.
Good. Okay, well, let's end this poll. Let's see the result. It was a little tricky question, but what do you think? 14, 7 or 79?
Yeah, can you share? Are you sharing the results?
Yeah, oh, sorry, I didn't push the button. There you go.
So yeah, actually, all of those do actually define some levels of competency. So the main one, and I think most of you got this, you listened, the 14 standard is the design standard. The 17 standard is our inspection and maintenance standard, which does address competency. The 34 standard is for the manufacturers, which also defines competency. The 10-1 is an area classification standard for gases and vapors, which also reference competency. And the 61508 standards are actually the one set of the functional safety standards, which we don't talk about here, but certainly is very important to understand. And again, it also references competency. So there really was no wrong answer.
Yes. Okay, great. Well, guys, let me remind you, want to talk to us. You cannot live talk, but you can type in questions. Go ahead, Bob.
Okay, so moving ahead, we had our own version here in the United States, as everybody is aware of Piper Alpha with the Deepwater Horizon. And Deepwater Horizon, obviously there wasn't quite the loss of life that we had with Piper Alpha. We certainly had 11 people die. But if you notice down there, the economic impact of this was about $45 billion. And obviously it affected BP and Transocean in a very dramatic way from a financial aspect. And obviously it affected all of the fishermen, the people in the industry and the tourism industry and everybody else. It was obviously a horrible, horrible accident that took place. But this was, I think, another wake-up call for the industry, and it started making people think again, what are we doing? How are we doing things? And again, Deepwater Horizon, and everybody knows the story about it, so I won't go into all the details, but basically it wasn't necessarily an electrical issue that was really the key deciding factor. It had to deal with the BOP and the well and all that other good stuff. But there was a report that was published, and this was the United States Coast Guard Bessie report on finding on the Deepwater Horizon. And one of the things that came out of this report was that some equipment on board was in bad condition and severely corroded. And some of that equipment had been left in hazardous areas. And if we've seen the movie, or you're familiar with Deepwater Horizon, what was the actual source of ignition? If you look at the movie, what they talked about was intake of gases into the motors, and the motors oversped, the lights started getting brighter, and then ultimately that was the source of ignition. Well, that was one theory. There was other theories that actually there was a door left open for electrical equipment that should have been purged and pressurized, but was not, and that potentially could have been the source of ignition. There was also theories that again, the electrical equipment actually on the driller's floor located in the Zone 1 area could have caused the explosion. So nobody actually truly came up with the final determination of actually what caused the initial explosion. It could have been, again, many, many different sources. But obviously that also changed the thought process with a lot of oil and gas companies, and starting to realize, hey, we do not want to have this happen to us. So the important thing is the certification of a product in and of itself is not the whole picture. If you look at those 3 pictures up there, those are pictures of electrical equipment that are actually only in the case of the picture on the left-hand side, that's an EX motor that was actually installed in a Zone 1 area that was only in service for about 2.5 years. So when it had been originally installed, I'm sure it was absolutely perfect and it was fine. The middle picture shows a bell that had been installed for about 5 years, but due to corrosion, due to the environment, obviously it's in pretty bad condition. And we see on the right-hand side a cable gland going into a flame-proof box, which is not something that we're not allowed to do. So it's not just the product certification, it's the proper selection, the installation practices, and certainly maintenance is a key issue. We just can't install this equipment and just let it go indefinitely without taking a look at it, making sure that it is still suitable. It's like driving your car. You don't drive it forever without changing the oil, changing the brake pads, doing all that stuff. We have to maintain this equipment. So a lot of engineers, and I'm sure we have a lot of engineers that are paying attention here, and we always think, well, it's just those operational guys, right? It's not necessarily the guys in the buildings that are doing the design work. It's the idiots in the field, so to speak, right? Well, it's not just necessarily the operational people. It's actually kind of a combination of a lot of different roles and responsibilities. So this was a great report that was done quite a few years ago by the HSC. And they looked at the root causes of a lot of major industrial accidents. And actually, if you notice, one of the biggest areas in which the root cause came from was actually at the specification stage. Now, what does that mean? The specification could be the fact that maybe some engineer designed a product that was not suitable, or maybe the design itself, not necessarily the product, but maybe the design itself was faulty. It could have been a lot of things. And we look at it and we say, well, it's the guys that are actually maintaining it and maintenance. And again, that's a healthy chunk, but it's only about 15%. So a lot of things that actually have come about out of some of this research is showing that a lot of the faults and a lot of the problems that we run into are actually developed at the very, very early stages. So it's important in this whole thought process that we don't just look at it from a maintenance and an installation issue, but we look at it from a design standpoint as well. So generally, and last week I had an opportunity to do an inspection on a vessel that was powered by LNG, and they called us in to do an inspection on this, and we finished it up. And of the 400 items that we saw that were installed, about in their case there was about 80 issues. Now some of these were, quite frankly, they were not that big of an issue, but that's a pretty healthy percent. In general, when you come in and you start doing inspections on EX installations, the ratio of issues that you might find is anywhere from 20 to 45%. It's not uncommon to find a lot of problems. And if we look at the example over on the right-hand side with this gas detection panel, that was a panel that was installed in a Zone 2 area, but clearly states that it is a non-hazardous panel. So that's not necessarily an issue for the guy that was actually doing the installation. It was more of an issue that never should have been there in the first place, right? And again, lack of training, lack of competency.
Oh, incredible.
So, another poll question.
You said 40%. You had 80 issue over 400. Incredible.
So what's that, about 18% or so, something like that? It was less than 100.
We have a new question for you guys. We show a chart moments ago showing what is the leading root cause of industrial accident, and see if you remember that, or if you know what it is. Say ops and maintenance, or specification, installation, change after commissioning, which are called modifications, and design and implementation. They are all cause of accident, every single one of them, but one is a leading cause, which is, when I learned that, I was a little stunned. I mean, you know, we always blame it on those guys in the field, but it's not always.
Yeah.
And on the other end, you know, the pictures you show about maintenance, crazy. After 2.5 years, the motor is completely rusted, rotted. Of course, can no longer, if it's a EXD motor, no longer suitable, you know.
Right.
So it's obviously accident happened. Okay, well, let me see if anyone else is answering, or we land a poll. We have a good percentage of you guys. Most of you said specifications.
Yes.
Yes. She's correct.
Fantastic. Yes, specifications was the correct answer. And again, as Paulo said, it is a bunch of different things, and all of them are actually, they're all potential causes, but specification seems to be the root cause of a lot of these industrial accidents. So let's continue on. So now let's get into the nitty gritty. What do the standards actually say? So again, the design standard, the -14 standard, the latest version is the 2013, and it's divided into 3 roles of individuals. And this is all located in Annex A of the standard. So it divides it up into knowledge and skills of a responsible person. So this could be a project manager, a project engineer, or it could be an operator technician, which are the individuals that are actually doing the installation and maintenance. And then finally, the designers. These are the folks that are actually selecting products, designing systems, and all that. So within the standard, it starts defining the competency for those 3 individuals or groups of individuals. And it starts to tell you specific information as to what that individual shall understand, should know. So the final thing, it states about an assessment, and the competency shall be verified and attributed at intervals relevant to national regulations on the basis of sufficient evidence that the person has does the person have the skill? Can they act competently? There's our behavior. And that do they have the relevant knowledge and understanding? So just because you have that knowledge and you have that understanding, the standard is actually saying you shall be assessed. Now, here's the important thing to understand about assessments. Assessment doesn't necessarily mean, and the standard doesn't say that it has to be done by a third party. A lot of organizations use outside training programs and assessment programs like COMPEX or the IECEx COPC program, which we'll talk about. but it doesn't necessarily say that it must be done that fashion. It can be done internally, but everybody that's going through it should at least go through this, and a new employee, just like orientation for doing your job, should be trained and assessed. So a little bit about intrinsic safety. There is what is called the 60079-25 standard, and that's for a IS system. And part of the requirements within the -25 standard is there's a requirement to make what is called a descriptive system document. And a DSD, for any of you who have done IS circuits, is something that is a requirement. People, in many cases, forget about it or don't do it. But in the standard, it actually says the individual that does this should be competent, and it should be stamped. It should be a drawing that's actually put into the hazardous location dossier, the file. So again, competency shows up in a lot of different IEC standards. Now, with regards to manufacturers, right? This is, again, as I mentioned, this is now a fairly new standard that came out. And they've added all of this information now for competency of individuals within organizations. And the reason why this was added into this 80079 standard was that a lot of manufacturers were actually sending out products, even though they would be third-party certified, there was mistakes being made along that manufacturing process line. So this standard actually is somewhat of a bolt-on to your ISO 9001 standard for your quality standard. So it's now starting to say that if I'm manufacturing EX equipment, that individuals within my organization in various roles shall be deemed competent and keep record and keep track of all that documentation. So there is actually, because competency is showing up in many different IEC standards and other non-IEC standards, there is actually going to be a new IEC technical specification called the 60079-44 that is to be published sometime in 2021. Last I have heard, it's going to be, I think, in May, and it will basically take the relevant competency details noted in the 14, 17. The 19 standard is for repair and overhaul of EX equipment, and it'll put all of this information in one technical specification. So it's going to take a lot of the information from all the standards and consolidate it, which is good. And it'll be a recommendation for companies and organizations to follow. So there are two main programs in the world to actually train and assess candidates. I mentioned COMPEX, and that was the first one. It was developed again in 1994 after not Deepwater Horizon, but Piper Alpha. The IECEx scheme came out about 12 years ago, the COPC scheme, and I teach both. We do both here at our organization. So I wanted to let you know a little bit different about how these break down and all that good stuff. So under COMPEX, you have modules 01, 03, 05, 07, and these are for the operatives for the selection and operations. The modules 02, 4, 6, 7, 8 are for, again, operatives. You have different modules for designers, and then you actually have a course specifically for responsible persons. The most common is the 01 through 4 program. It's about 4.5 to 5 days, depending on the center. And basically, it's about 2.5 days of classroom work and about 2 days of practical assessment, where you're doing hands-on installation and inspection. There's also what is called the COMPEX 12 course, which is a design course, which is all classroom, and it's generally about a 5-day course. There are about 52 centers located worldwide. Most of them are in the UK. I think as you see by this map, there's about 27 centers in the UK. There's a handful of centers located throughout the world. It's owned by an organization called JTL, which is based in the UK. The one thing about COMPEX, which is I think there's a good thing about COMPEX, is there's a very much a consistency amongst all of the centers that are set up around the world. So if you take Compex from one place, it's basically going to be very, very similar. Not necessarily the training material, but the assessments and inspections and installations are going to be very, very similar because JTL provides the guidelines as to how these candidates shall be assessed. So it's a very consistent program worldwide. Now the IECEx has come up with their program, and it's called the Certificate of Personnel Competency. And they've broken it down into these various modules. And the main one is the 001, which is basically kind of a fundamentals course. The 009 is the designer course. And the IECEx has basically made it somewhat of a modular type thing to where you can kind of pick and choose and take which modules really make more sense for you. Where Compex is a little bit more, we take these sets of modules as one class. The IECEx says we do these different ones and do it in a way that makes more sense for you. Now the way this works is an IEC certifying body becomes a certifying body for the COPC scheme, meaning that these are the same organizations that certify products. They can also certify individuals. And currently, about 15 of the certification bodies have gone through this assessment, but not all of your IECEx certification bodies are qualified to do this. So you can go to the IECEx website and you can find these organizations that are qualified to provide this documentation. Now, there's also what is called an IECEx recognized training provider. A recognized training provider is an organization that's been vetted by the IECEx to provide the training for those individuals that wish to achieve their COPC. Generally, the IECEx recognized training provider will work specifically with a particular lab in which the training provider will provide the training, the lab will provide the assessment. Now, here's the important thing to understand under the IECEx COPC. It's not mandated to go to a recognized training provider. You can actually just go directly to the EXCB and say, I just want to be assessed. You don't have to be trained. It's really an assessment program. And depending on which modules it is, it could be a written exam, it could be a practical exam. So it's really, and every certification body has it set up slightly different. So you have a little bit more choices, I would say, under the IECEx, or a little bit more flexibility in order to achieve it. So this, I think there's a couple things. This is actually our setup for doing a practical assessment for an installation. The picture that you see on the right, that's actually a portable unit that we take around to clients, and that for the practical assessment, they have to do an installation. We provide them glands, cables, do all this good stuff, and then they have to select it. They have a certain amount of time in which to do it. And then basically the certification body will assess their work and determine whether or not the individual is competent. Now, certificates. Both Compex certificates are valid for 5 years. So on the left-hand side, you see an example of a Compex certificate. Under the IECEx, the certificates are also for 5 years, and they're actually listed on the IECEx website. So that's actually a very nice thing, because you can now validate whether or not an individual is actually competent. It's all there, just like a product certificate. So I like the IECEx in the standpoint that it's all very transparent, it's very open. So the important thing to remember here, competency. There are 2 programs, but there's more than just 2. These are 2 of the most common ones. And again, we teach and train around both of them, and they're both fantastic. But the important thing is whether or not you wish to go through a formalized training program or decide to get your Compex or IECEx COPC. The important thing is to understand that there's a lot of relevant information that you need to know if you're involved in the EX world. The one document that I would tell you that everybody should have on hand is the 60079-14 standard. That is a very, very, very important standard that you should all have, that you should read, take a look at it, because a lot of the competency programs are based upon the design standard. So be aware of that. Do your own research on training assessment programs. Again, training is not a requirement, but the assessment is. And here's the important thing, right? It's only as strong as the weakest link. So we want to make sure that we're not that weakest link with regards to EX.
Great, Bob. You know, given you are an instructor of both scheme, there is no excuse for anybody not to be trained and assessed. You know, if we want to do our job right. And it's like, listening to you, I was thinking, you know, I can drive, I was able to drive my car when I was 16. You know, in Italy, is legally it's 18. But I didn't have a driving license. You know, it's not legally to. So, you know, get a certificate, an assessment is like, you know, a driver license is okay. You know how to do it, but somebody proves that you really know how to do it.
Right.
Okay, great. We'll go to the next slide.
Okay.
Okay, so you have our contact details here. Now, I will, since there are no open questions, well, talk too fast. You can stop sharing. Now we share the question and answer presentation. We do have a couple of questions. Randy says, what regulations say that you need to be assessed? What global region requires it? Is that a mandatory requirement?
Right. That's a great question. And it really, I can't answer that other than, well, I can answer it as an example. In the United States, if I was to work in, again, well, for example, the LNG transport fuel industry, they've now determined that competency is a requirement. So if I'm in that industry, the Coast Guard, the regulators in that case, is saying I must be competent and be assessed. If I'm dealing in the offshore drilling industry in the Gulf of Mexico, that's not a requirement from the U.S. Coast Guard over there. If I'm doing onshore work, it's not a requirement from OSHA here in the United States.
Now, it's a requirement to be competent, not to go through a course or a test, right?
It basically, it's whatever the standards, the standards that are in place. So, for example, in the United States, we follow the National Electric Code, which are our NFPA documents. And the NFPA documents state things like individuals should be trained and assessed. But that was the key word. It says should, doesn't say shall. So the important thing is to understand there is a difference between should and shall, and who mandates it. And ultimately, it is the regulator that mandates it. Most of the competency requirements that you see out there aren't necessarily driven by regulators. It's really driven by the industry and the clients themselves. Now, that being said, in the UK, absolutely they require it. The DSEER regulations require it. You're starting to see this in other parts of the world. In Australia, they do require competency. So it really, it's coming. You're going to see it more and more, but it's really driven more from the end clients that is just saying, hey, you need to have this.
Well, it is, I can think of, you know, in a parallel with functional safety, which used to be should, now is a shall. It's a mandatory requirement. There's no other way around it. Now, and there's another question. Who is responsible to verify that the person are competent, that they have to be competent?
Yeah, who verifies it? So the way it works is that under Compex, as an example, the way it works is that I'm an assessor under the Compex scheme. And so individuals take an exam. I don't grade the exam. That's an online exam that's sent to JTL and they grade it. They say pass or fail. On the practicals, what I do, I have a list of various other things that I have to check off to make sure. Did this individual select the appropriate gland? Did they install it properly? Did they do this? and I send all that information off, and JTL overlooks my work and basically says, yeah, okay, if they have any questions on it, they'll come back to me.
Yeah.
Under the IECEx, it's a little bit different. It's the certification body that has the exam, the written exam. Now, us as a recognized training provider, what we do, we will actually pass the exams out to the students after they finish the training program, and we'll invigilate the exam, meaning that we just sit there and we let them take the exam, make sure that they're not talking and doing all that good stuff, right? Then we collect all the exams, and then we take the exams, and then we'll grade them against the score key, if you will. But ultimately, we have to take those exams and send them back to the certification body for them to double check to make sure that everything.
I guess there also a question says, I'm granted a job and and I'm supposed to be competent. Who's to check? I imagine the person who granted the job, so the EPC contractor or somebody.
Yeah.
Eventually, might end up in a problematic situation. There was some accident, so the person was not competent. Who was to prove that that person was competent in the first place?
So that's really where these competency programs come into play, right? Let's put it this way. I could, my company is a training company, and I know what we're being assessed upon. And I go in, and matter of fact, next week I'm doing for some customers. They don't want to go through the whole formalized program. They want something that's a little more customized, and they want a piece of paper at the end of the day that says, I'm competent. I can issue a certificate under my company's name to say, hey, I've trained you and I've assessed you and I've done that. Now, the key thing is that good enough for their client? Is that acceptable? They're doing it more to get the training, and they want to have that as an ongoing thing internally. So it really just depends. Sometimes, for example, one client that we're working with that's building some skids, the end client is insisting that the individuals who are doing all the installation must have their Compex. So therefore, it's very cut and dried. That's what they have to have. They must have it. And we've had other people that are, we've had students that have come through. They say, we're doing a project for a client in Singapore, in which the client is saying everybody, all the designers must have their IECEx COPC. So therefore, we provide them the training and the assessments and do all that good stuff. So it's really being driven by it's more being driven by the end client than it is really the regulators at this stage. I think over the next 5 to 10 years, you're going to see more and more countries adopt it and say, hey, this is really what we want to have, and are going to insist upon it. And you'll see more competency programs pop up because of that.
Hey, Bob, we have a tricky question, I remember you being recorded, so somebody wants to know which of the two programs is better, which one you recommend, being the
and it's a great question. Actually, probably, Paulo, we don't need to run through our Q&A because we've got some good questions here, but no, that's a great question, and I get asked that all the time. I think both Compex and the COPC programs are fantastic. I really do. The thing I like about Compex, and this is my own personal opinion, it's been around for a long period of time. It's been around for about 26 years now. And there's very much a consistency amongst Compex, meaning that if you go to a Compex center in the UK versus our center or another center in Korea or Singapore or whatever, they're very consistent. It's a very uniform methodology. JTL does a very good job of making sure that all the centers are doing the right thing. The IECEx, because it's really left up to the certification body to make the determination of what determines whether or not an individual is competent. The IECEx has come out with operational guidelines and basically states, that if I'm a operator technician, or if I want to go through this module, what should that individual be able to demonstrate? Then it's up to the certification body to say, okay, well, that individual, we're gonna show that they're competent by doing this, this, and this. So then it's up to the certification body to come up with their assessment, their exams, and then the training provider, in effect, we build our training program to kind of match, if in effect, what the certification body is going to want to make sure that they are competent in, if you will. Meaning that there's a lot more variation between the IECEx, COPC programs out there. It is consistent, but there's a lot more, I guess, freedom, flexibility. And the one thing I do like about the IECEx is that all the certificates are online. You can see them all. There's a little bit more. The one thing I will say under the IECEx scheme, it is only based upon the IEC standards. Compex also gets into a lot more UK regulations that is not necessarily relevant to certain parts of the world. So they're both good.
Well, I guess it also depends on what your customer is asking, you know, maybe somebody might
Yeah,
like,
yeah.
I imagine that people that are certified under both program. Is that the case? Have you seen any?
It is. It is. You know, I personally, I went through Compex myself as a student quite a few years ago, and then I decided to take the IECEx. Now, what I did when I took IECEx, I didn't go through the training. I just said I wanted to get assessed, and that was fine. I didn't, and I passed. Yes, I did. So, and then to start instructing it, you know, the fact that I had my Compex instructor qualification and assessor qualification, they said, okay, that's fine. But yeah, there's no reason why you could have one or both. I would, and I had this question here not too long ago. A guy actually has his Compex, and he was very interested in maybe taking some of the IECEx modules. And I said, that's a great idea. But there was the modules that he was interested in were modules that he had already covered within Compex. And I said, you don't really need to unless you want to. You want to go through that and you can do it. Or if you just want to be assessed against it, fantastic. So there are modules within the IECEx that really aren't covered as much or as in detailed under Compex. Or you might have to, for example, you take the Compex 12 course, and there's a lot of design stuff, but people don't want to spend the whole 5 days going through it. So under the IECEx, it's basically really down to a day and a half. So you can do a lot of things that way.
Well, since we have no open questions, no more questions, guys, you know, please go ahead. We have a few more minutes. Let me run through the question we received through the registration process. I guess, can you guys see it? Bob, you see the questions?
I see it.
So when will the IEC 6007944 be published? And the reason IEC 6007933 is not an harmonized EN standard yet.
Yeah, this so 44 is to be published in May of 2021. And we talked a little bit about that, and that's that technical specification. The -33 is a kind of a catch-all standard. That's for type S protection. So if you're familiar with the various EX protection concepts, you have things like EXD, flameproof, EXI, intrinsic safety, EXE, increased safety, EXP, purge, pressurized. S is a special, meaning that it doesn't really fall into other standards. And so it's kind of an open one, and it's been adopted as a technical report by Senelec from the IEC. But the technical report is not adopted as a standard if it does not meet the threshold for approval by members of Senelec. So, for example, what you see there, that's actually the UK version of it, and it's adopted as a technical report, but not necessarily as a standard. And that's strictly just because the rest of Europe hasn't all adopted it as a standard, if you will.
Okay, well, the next question you already answered was, you know, which would be easier of the two, but we did answer that.
Yeah.
Same here, CompX or CompC. Let's see this new question. We build products to IEC 8007934, and I've been told we need competency by our certification agency. well, the option, I think we have clearly discussed this in our webinar, right, Bob?
Yeah, and so this is again for the manufacturers. And if you think about what the complex programs and the COPC programs, they were more around the 60079-14 for the roles of a responsible person, a designer, and an operator technician. Well, as a manufacturer, you now have procurement, you have assembly people, you have different roles, you have salespeople, you have different people in different roles that are not necessarily defined within the -14. And therefore, the training programs, the modules, either in Compex or in the IEC COPC program, are not necessarily geared right now to address this. So what I recommend to people is that either contract out to another organization. We do this where we actually have a training program specifically for manufacturers, or do it in-house. Basically look at the standard, find out what is it in the standard that you really need to have, and do your own in-house training and assess your individuals and put that all together. So there's ways to kind of address it. And if somebody is interested in that, just have them or give me a shout.
Well, in conclusion here, Bob, how do our participants and our friends here want to know more about IECEx and COPC? How do they find out about it?
Right.
Get more info on it.
So the IEC.com or IECEx.com is the place to go. The documents that you would want to download and find out more is these operational documents. So the OD 504 gives you all the details of what I mentioned as far as what this individual should understand to pass each one of those modules. If you say, hey, I want to actually do this, then the OD 502 is your application, and the OD 521 is the Recognized Training Provider Program. So you can download those. Those are free to have access to.
Okay.
I think under Compex, we have this.
Yep, sorry.
Yeah.
Compex, yeah, there's a website of Compex.
Yeah, compex.org.uk. So you can go to that website and it'll give you information as far as the centers. The way you register for all of these, either Compex or the IECEx, is under Compex. They don't do the registration directly through them. They give you the contact information for the centers that are in your area. So you would reach out to a center and say, hey, I want to find out more about Compex. Under the IECEx, the best bet is to go to either the Recognized Training Providers page or to the IECEx certification body page that offer the COPC, and reach out to those folks, and they can provide you more information as to what they actually offer. Or certainly you can reach out to me and Paulo.
Of course. Yes, and we do have a question where not directly related to our webinar, but it's about competency in seal application, functional safety. Where is it referenced? I know you prepare a slide. Here we go.
Yeah, so the 61508 and the 61511 standards for functional safety, the latest versions, they have, as I think you just mentioned earlier, they replaced all the things with should to shall. And so now many countries have now said, well, look, if you're going to be doing functional safety design, you need to show that you're competent. And so the TUV Rhineland course, certainly the functional safety TUV Rhineland course, is a fantastic course. I took it quite some time ago, and it's a fantastic.
There are several courses, but it has become a challenge. As for the manufacturer and the engineering firm and everybody involved, you have to also have a functional safety management in place. It's a mandatory requirement now. So we do get questions all over about other issues. We have a lot of webinars online, so please check our live webinar schedule or go to our YouTube channel. And we are about just about an hour. More accurate than this we could not have been. So give us one more second, guys. See if you can tell us how we did today. Mostly how Bob did, I was just sitting.
If it was excellent, it was me. If it was poor, it's Paulo.
Bob, the poor or, not as expected, they are for me, no issue. I'm a number guy, I can take it. Okay, guys. Thank you for being with us. In the meantime, let me stop sharing this. Okay. And there is no more open questions. We have about 1 hour. So you are in your breakfast time now. So you can go to breakfast. Let me end the poll here and show you what you guys said about it. We do. You have compliments from question. Thank you, Bob. Always a pleasure to listen to Bob and so on. Great, Bob. Thanks again.
Oh.
Thank you guys for listening in. We'll talk soon.
All right.
Schedule. Bye-bye.
Ciao.
Ciao. Ciao.